welcome to our session about ensuring fair play. We're going to take about 45 minutes and we're going to cover a few topics about fair play, mostly around the environment, education and supervision, with some practical tips along the way about how you can get your tournaments to be fair tournaments and the players in those tournaments to be trusting one another. We don't talk about the statistical analysis very much. We have a separate webinar which talks all about the details of the statistics and how you would use those. This is what we're covering today, the why, like what our objectives are, how we actually go about doing it, and then, of course, some practical things. So the first step is to think about what is the first rule of chess. And I've thrown up a few options. Well, according to FIDE, rule number 1.1 in the FIDE laws of chess is that the game of chess is played between two opponents. And it's not until rule number 11.3 that you get to a point where they explain that you shouldn't be able to get any assistance during the course of your game. But the fundamental rule that people are breaking when they get assistance during a game of chess is it breaks rule number 1, that it should be a game that is played independently between two people and only two players. And because it breaks such a fundamental rule, such a basic rule of chess, like the number 1 rule, that's why it's such an emotional and such an important issue that we need to talk about. As soon as somebody gets assistance in their games, they've broken that rule, and it's no longer one player against one player, and it's completely unfair. So this is not a new phenomenon. People have been getting assistance and playing unfairly since the 1990s, right? Since basically computers were around. And you can see a couple of positions here where White has played in the first position like an unbelievably good tactical move when there was a much simpler human-like option available. And the second scenario, again, an unbelievably complex and powerful move under time pressure in that second situation. So you can have situations where people just play like better than is believable, and we have to make some assumptions then that there are some assistance, some computer assistance. The challenge is, how do you tell the difference between a computer and a person? Right? It may not always be as easy as seeing a move which is like unbelievably good when there was a simple winning option on the table, but instead someone's chosen to play this unbelievably good move. Because computers and humans obviously can play the same moves. Right? We're playing a game of chess, and any move on the board is possible. And so you can never, or you have to be careful to consider when is it definitely a computer that's giving you assistance, and when is it a human that got lucky or chose a good move by accident. In over-the-board events, we have measures that we follow in almost all over-the-board events that will try to ensure that people are playing fairly in those over-the-board tournaments. Be aware that the rules for an event like this, where you've got Magnus sitting in there, may be the same as the rules that you have in your club, but the players are there for a different reason, and the fair play measures that we apply are significantly different. And it's important to have the appropriate level of fair play measures, right? Because there are people on the other side of the fence, quite literally in this case, that are there as social casual players and not as world champions. And it may not be appropriate to go through the same level of screening for those players. And so if you're running an online event, you have to understand that it is the same thing. Every online event will be different, and you need to think about the regulations and the processes for fair play that are most appropriate to that event. So the first step, if we're trying to do the same as what we would do in an over-the-board event, is to understand that the players themselves at home are creating their own playing area. Right, so we can see here an example of a very clean playing area that we've got set up, and the playing area is built by that player. So they might be in their living room, in their bedroom, wherever it is that they're playing. They've created that playing area for themselves, and so you can ask them to do, and you can support them in making the playing area, kind of the same, or thinking about it the same way as they would about a playing area in an over-the-board event. Hybrid events are a little bit easier in some ways. Players are being physically supervised, right, in online events. So there's an arbiter in the room with the players while all the players are playing online. There's a lot of advantages to these hybrid tournaments. People are able to compete without the cost and and challenge of long distance travel. We're in Australia, and in Australia, we may only get 100, 150 people to come and play in the national championships, because there are some very long distances people need to travel in order to get to a national championships to one central venue. But with distributed participation, the fact that people can play from perhaps their own city or their own town or even their own house, hybrid events will allow much greater participation, because the cost and the difficulties involved in playing are much lower. The barrier to entry is much, much lower. There are even 3D, like physical chessboards, and like we have here, where you can play in a hybrid event, which are connected to the computer and connected to the Tornelo, and they will show you the moves that have to be played. So you don't even need to look at the screen very often. You only focus on the chessboard in the same way that you would in an over-the-board tournament. And so the experience of hybrid tournaments is kind of trying to take the best of both worlds, the best of the online and the best of the over-the-board, and bring them together. It's even possible now to have hybrid tournaments FIDE rated, assuming that you follow all the regulations, the FIDE regulations. You can even have rated, FIDE rated hybrid events. So there is this is a new area that is definitely growing in popularity, because there's a huge amount of benefit for players to get involved in events like this. All right, so let's think about why we are seeing people who are getting assistance in their games. Why do people cheat? All right, why do they get assistance? And I guess there are two types of cheating. There's what we call opportunistic cheating, and there's malicious cheating. So opportunistic cheating is more accidental, if you like. People cheat because it's easier to cheat than it is to play fairly. Right? So there's a phone right there on your desk. You're playing a game of chess. Like, you've got stockfish. It's temptation. It's right there, and it's difficult to jump in, and difficult to put that phone out of sight and out of mind. Right? So it's just there, and you feel like it's just easier to do it than not. Some people getting assistance every single move of every single game. It's just blatant, flagrant cheating. It's really easy to spot, because every single move of every single game, they're just copying the moves from the computers. Right? A much more difficult type of assistance to note is when people are cheating intermittently, and so you'll find that one move or two moves in a game, there is some assistance being had. Right? And that's a much more difficult type of cheating to see. Malicious cheating is a little different. It is repeated, it's deliberate, it's premeditated, and my feeling from watching online chess tournaments over the last 16 months or 18 months is that most of the cheating that happens is opportunistic. It is almost accidental in a way, right? That people are finding it easier to get assistance than they are to play fairly. And so you get a lot of people who are getting assistance, they're cheating in their games online when they would never do that in an over-the-board event. When they are honest people, fundamentally, right? They're not doing this with premeditation and malice and forethought. They're doing it simply because the temptation is too great. And there's a lot of research in behavioral psychology which talks about why people behave online much worse than they do when they are in person, right? There's lots of reasons, and we see this all over the place. You just have to go to Facebook or any comments thread of any website anywhere around the world, and you'll see trolls, you'll see bad behavior. All right? And so why is it that people do and say these things online that they would never consider doing or saying in the real world? And there's a few reasons, right? There's some, I guess, technical jargon here, but disassociative anonymity is basically the idea that the person online is anonymous and nobody really knows who they are. And even though they may have entered an event or they might be playing with their real name, there's still that feeling that when you're online, nobody knows who you are anonymous, you're hiding behind a computer, right? So you're invisible and anonymous. And so that makes you able to ignore some of those normal social cues that would keep your behavior in check and behave badly. There's often asynchronicity. So you can send a message and the response that you get from that message is delayed. All right. So if in a real world you say something rude to somebody, they immediately respond to you or reprimand you for that bad behavior. You learn your lesson. But online, when there's a long delay time-wise from when you do something wrong, like get some assistance and cheat in a game of chess, and then you get punished a week later, right? If you get caught a week later, there's now that delay, which makes you feel like there was no consequences at the time. They can kind of interpret or imagine their opponent in some weird and wonderful way. Again, not deliberately, but this is subconsciously. They can say, well, my opponent's probably getting some help as well. They're probably cheating, or they're not being hurt by this. They can kind of imagine their opponent in some unusual way that you wouldn't be able to do when you were face to face. Online, you can have a persona, right? A lot of sites where people play chess are not using their real name. They're not a representation of themselves. They're playing under a username or a handle or a fake name, and so people are building habits that online is somebody different, and I am me, but the person who's playing chess online is somebody or some entity that is outside of who I am in the real world. Right? And so you build a persona that can behave differently from who you have, who you actually are in the real world. And online, there's no authority. Right? The internet is free and open, and anybody can do whatever they want. Again, this is the psychological basis that people have. Obviously, it's not necessarily reality, but these are the things that people subconsciously go through, which lets them choose to make different decisions online. The people who make the worst choices are those who are what we call psychosocially immature. Right? So psychosocial immaturity is where people are making making bad decisions in the short term and suffering in the long term. And this is exactly what's happening with people who are choosing to cheat when they're playing online. There is this temptation. You've got your phone or your engine, whatever it is, right next to you. And so the temptation is great. The gains are immediate. You just have to get a little bit of help. You just have to switch on that phone and ask Stockfish, and you're going to play this brilliant move, and you're going to win the game, and you're going to feel really good, right? And it can be difficult to make a choice, especially when you have a little bit of immaturity. And so those people who are psychosocially immature are focusing on short-term gains. They're making these impulse decisions. They can't delay gratification. They can't say, well, if I play fairly now, then I'll have the long-term benefit of being more accepted into the community, of actually learning on my own and improving my game over the long term. They're susceptible to peer group pressure, and this is really important because in communities of people who are playing chess, when there's one or two people who are cheating and not being dealt with, then other people will start to follow the leader. They will also start to cheat, and you will end up with huge numbers of people. We've seen up to maybe even 30 or 40% of people in a chess tournament who are getting assistance, and it's because it's like a disease. It spreads. So if one person is getting assistance, then two other people might think, well, I should do that as well. We can also just be aware to use this, this susceptibility to peer group pressure and this follow the leader kind of attitude in the opposite direction as well. And if you start building a community of people who are playing fairly, then also that fair play culture grows as well, right? And if you can't anticipate consequences, that means you can't really think forwards, like if I do this now, what's going to happen later? It makes it even harder to make good decisions when you're under emotional pressure, when you're under time pressure, or if you have kind of a natural tendency towards maybe a high IQ but a low EQ, that's an emotional intelligence, and lack of empathy. So all of this is describing a lot of chess players, right? In particular, people in their teens and early 20s. Right, so people in their teens and early 20s are at the lowest point in their life in terms of their psychosocial maturity. Right? And we know this from daily life because we know the sorts of decisions that teenagers make, and we know that they make bad decisions. That is part of growing up. That's part of life. So if you've got people, from the age of 11 or 12 years old all the way through into their mid and late 20s, they are the people who are likely or more likely to make bad decisions based on some of these psychological or behavioral psychological pressures that they're under. So I think it's important for us to understand why people are doing this, because the players know what they should be doing, right? And yet they're choosing to do the wrong thing. And I really believe in 90% of cases, it's not premeditated, it's not with malice, it's not deliberate. It's simply because they can't, they don't have the self-control and the self-discipline, they don't have that psychological maturity to do the right thing, right? They've got, impulse control problems. And so the impulse, the temptation is right there, right? You should exercise every day, but do you actually go to the gym every day? Or is the temptation to sit on the couch just too strong, right? The instant gratification test. If you put a bowl of chocolate or chips on the table, it's unhealthy, but do you have the self-discipline to ignore that and to eat the carrots and celery instead of the chips and the chocolate, right? If your friends are going out graffitiing, and they say, hey, come along, you might know what you need to do, but the instant gratification, the benefits that you're getting from doing the wrong thing are just too great for some people to make that decision. So we need to understand these are the reasons that people are going and getting assistance. So in our tournaments, right, what should we be aiming for? Like, what are we trying to do? What's our goal? And the goal is to build a community of players who trust one another, right? We've got to provide a positive experience for our players, right? And the opposite of that is to go out and try and catch people who are cheating. Right? So you don't want to start with that I guess mindset where you go and say, right, we're going to get out there, we're going to catch everyone who's cheating, and we're going to punish them. Right? That's going to destroy trust, not build it. Right? So you have to provide an experience for people who that makes them want to come back, that makes them want to do the right thing. Right? So this is the fundamental, the core fundamental that it's important to start with, because without it, you'll be destroying trust every time that you are suspicious and aggressive and you're out there trying to catch people. Right? You'll be destroying trust in the community, and people will be feeling the same negative pressures, the same negative psychology. And nobody wants to play in a tournament where everyone's looking over each other's shoulder and everyone's suspicious that, well, he couldn't possibly have won that game, he must have cheated. And if that's the sort of event that you're playing in, you're not going to get many people coming back. So you need a community of people who trust one another, and you have to think about every action that you take and everything that you do as either building that trust or destroying it. So I think it's really important to use the right language, the right terminology to start building trust amongst the players, right? Because without language, right, you can't think, and the way that you describe things directs the way that people are thinking, right? So if we're using language where we're talking about fair play, we're talking about people who are getting unfair assistance. They're not cheating, right? Because we know that the psychological reasons. We know that their motivation may not be, deliberate, may not be malicious, right? So we're not calling them cheaters. We're not saying people get cheating. We're saying that they've made bad decisions. They've had their poor choices or bad decisions to choose to get unfair assistance when they're meant to be playing fairly. Right? When people do make those bad decisions, they're teachable moments. They're not opportunities to, punish somebody and throw them in jail and ban them from chess forever and all those sorts of things that sometimes you see people are crying out for online. They're teachable moments. They're opportunities to share with an immature person who's made a bad decision, an education process. We can teach them, what the impacts of those decisions are and how, if they go about life making those decisions in other areas, it may impact their life in greatly negative ways. But in this environment, how has it impacted other people? How has it impacted the tournament? Right? So talk about teachable moments, talk about learning, talk about building good trust. And most of the supervision that happens in a chess tournament, and when you're watching for people who are cheating, you shouldn't be there to try and catch people who are cheating. You should be protecting good performances, right? Because you need some evidence, I guess. You need some way of saying to the community when a player plays 300 or 400 points above their rating, when they have a star performance in a tournament, you need to protect them. You need to be able to say, I'm 100% sure that these people have played fairly. Because the experience when you have a great tournament and you play really well, and then you don't get the social recognition for it. In fact, if you played well, you're going to get like negative attention and negative emotion from the community, is going to destroy everybody's interest in playing chess. Because one of the greatest things of playing is to play well. And when you play really well and you have a good tournament, you feel good about yourself. And if you've done that fairly, and everybody is thinking and calling you a cheat and starting to undermine that good feeling, like, why is anybody going to bother playing? So we need to be, as arbiters and organizers of tournaments, we need to be protecting those people, and supervision and all of the processes that we put in place to ensure fair play, right, are really not there to catch people who are cheating. They're really there to protect the players who play well, and they're there to help build a community of people who trust one another. So this is some language that you can use. In the inevitable case of somebody catching, catching somebody who's got unfair assistance during their games, right? You'll catch somebody, and you have to make a decision about what do you do once you've caught somebody, right? And there's a lot of evidence from the world of crime, and I always think about cheating as if it were a low-level criminal offence in a community of people, in a village or a suburb of a city, right? How do the police and how do the law enforcement agencies around the world deal with shoplifting? How do they deal with graffiti, right? And nobody around the world tries to catch every single graffiti artist, right, and throw them in jail once they do catch them, right? The fact that you can be caught is often much more scary than actually the punishment itself, right? And you would probably remember that from when you were a kid, and you go, oh my gosh, I'm sitting outside the principal's office. Once you're in detention, it's okay. But the fact that the fact that you could get caught, and the fact that there is some law enforcement around is the best deterrent. They've done studies about punishments, and whether increasing the severity of punishments and whether throwing people in prison will actually deter crime, and it doesn't. Right? It doesn't. Right? At the end of the day, the punishments really don't change the behaviour. It's more about the fact that people know that there are law enforcement, the fact that there's some education, and people end up in a community where it's not the done thing to do, and you can get communities of people where graffiti is just, it's not part of the community, and that's what we're trying to build. So this was Gandhi, who said that forgiving is more brave than to punish. And it is a challenge for you as a tournament organizer or as an arbiter. Like, what do you do when you catch somebody? And what we do, the first time that you find somebody who's getting assistance, we talk to them, we educate them, we have the conversation, we ask for them to understand what's happening, and then we forgive straight away, and they can come back and play in the very next tournament. Right? If they come back and play in the next tournament, we expect their behavior to change. Right? And if you catch somebody and change their behavior, you have won, right? Because you've got somebody who's changed their behavior, who can now be a leader for everybody else in your tournament, right? If you catch somebody and kick them out of your tournaments forever or punish them, then you've created fear and mistrust and anger, and you've now got nobody to lead the way in the tournaments for everybody else. So forgiving people, allowing them back, certainly the first time is the what we think is the best way of doing that. Understand that trust breeds trust, in the same way that cheating breeds cheating. Right? If you can just eliminate one or two people who are cheating in each event, build the community so that everybody knows that it's a trustworthy environment. There is supervision, and there are actions and consequences for people who do the wrong thing. They're not going to be allowed in the tournament. If you can forgive and trust yourself, and you as the organizer and the arbiter trust the players in the tournament, you'll be setting yourself up for a tournament and a community of players who trust one another over time. Right? We run a series of school tournaments in Australia, And those tournaments have got these, mostly teenage kids, people who are the most likely, they're the most psychosocially immature. They're the most likely to be getting assistance in their games. And every now and then somebody does try to cheat, but we have processes in place that will, catch them, and we then talk to them and their teachers and their parents, and we explain the situation, and we try to educate them and help them to make better decisions, and we let them come back next time. And over a number of months last year, when we were catching people catch and eliminate, we built a community of players who trust one another, right? In our RJ Shield series of tournaments, it's the same 200 or 300 people who are coming to all the tournaments, right? The people who are deliberately cheating, who get caught, and then they don't come back because it's not the sort of environment that people are looking for. So understand that, trust breeds trust. You have to be the one who sets that, sets the tone and leads by way of example, and you have to trust everybody who's playing in your tournament, and you have to have expectations that that everybody will play fairly. And there's a great little interactive visualization online where we'll share this link with you afterwards, and you can go and watch what it's like, and just imagine that all these little people are players in your chess community, right? Not necessarily in one tournament, but the network of people who are playing in your community. And you can see how when people are cheating and continue to cheat, then it spreads like a disease. But also when people are trusting one another, then that also spreads, and you'll see that that trust grows. So how do we ensure that people are playing fairly in our tournaments? Because that's what we want. We want to make sure that people are playing fairly. We want to make sure that we're building this community of people who trust one another, right? And it's a ripple effect, right? For every one thing that you do, it spreads out from one person to the next, to the next, to the next. So there are 3 steps to the process. There are 3 things that we're encouraging people to do to build fair play into their tournaments. And that is, number 1, have an environment that is conducive to fair play, right? We know that it's difficult. It is really hard for people to make the right decision. The temptation is there, right? The bowl of candy is sitting on the table, and we're asking them not to grab some, right? And so we want to make the environment as easy as possible for somebody to do the right thing, right? If you're on a diet and trying not to eat candy, the easiest possible thing to do is not to leave it on the table right in front of you. Put it in a cupboard up on a high shelf somewhere, so it takes a bit of effort to go to it, right? So how do we create an environment that is conducive to fair play, that is going to help people to make the right decisions? We need more than just an environment. We also need supervision, because we need people, we need to be watching people, and people need to know that they're being watched, right? Because that will build trust. Everyone who's playing fairly will feel comfortable because they know that there's supervision, right? And the people who are considering getting help or cheating will think twice about it because they know that there's a law enforcement around. Okay, and that's the same as if you're in a community and you're going for a walk late at night. If you see a policeman, you feel much safer. You know there's supervision around, and so there's less. You feel like there's less chance of any crimes taking place. So you're more trusting in the environment. The third step, we need to verify. So we get through to that process. Environment's not enough, supervision's not enough, and also we need to verify that what we've done in those first 2 stages is working. All right, so we need to go through those processes. So the environment, what sort of things can we do in our environment to build a place where it is easier to play fairly than it is to get assistance, right? Because most online tournaments, it's easier to cheat than it is to play fairly. So there's a few key things. Firstly, we should be using people's real names, right? If you're using a real name, if people are playing under their real name, you're starting to remove some of those, psychological, pressures that let people make bad decisions more easily, right? So we're trying to remove that anonymity, right? We want to build repeat interactions with other players. So they can't think, well, my opponent's probably an evil person anyway. There's some dragon that that it's, they deserve to be cheated on, right? Once you've got repeated interactions, once you've got a community of people who've played each other a number of times, you're much less likely to have people who are cheating on one another, right? The local club event is much safer than an anonymous international competition. So have repeat interactions, share faces, share names, then people see and they get to know each other. Even better, if those communities of people who are playing against each other can also play against each other in over-the-board events in real life, right? Or if they're in hybrid tournaments, they can get together and stay in the same room, because you're building those human connections and getting the natural inclination that people have in the real world to be fair, to be stronger emotions than the isolation and anonymity of the internet. Make sure you've got great communication, that you're talking about cheating and online fair play, right? In the early days of online tournaments, we saw some tournament organizers who were saying, well, we don't want to mention like cheating because that might give people the idea that they can go and get a computer to help them, right? So if we don't mention it, then we're not going to give those people the ideas, which is a bit crazy, right? People are going to think of the ideas anyway. It's like, if you don't mention alcohol, these kids, or don't mention smoking. If you've got a bunch of kids, then they're never going to find out about it themselves. Well, it's just ridiculous. Of course, they're going to find out about themselves, and it's much better for them to go in and to make those decisions with some education and some idea of what to expect long in advance, right? Which is why, in schools, when kids are very young, 12, 10, years old, they are getting educated about smoking, drugs, alcohol, all of the things that they will at some point come across and have to make decisions about in their later life. So communicate, make sure that there's instructions and help files and processes in place, and that you're talking about these sorts of things all the time, and talking about it in a way, like we said before, that is building trust, right? So it's not about catching the people who are cheating, it's about building the community of trust and talking about what you want to see happen all the time, not what you're hoping to avoid. Transparency builds trust. So, being able for everybody to see what's going on and sharing information and sharing the processes, that's what builds trust. So having a secret, anonymous formula that will just disqualify players if they do the wrong thing doesn't give you any responsibility, and it doesn't help build trust with the players, because they're like, well, we don't know what's going on. Maybe it'll disqualify somebody who's playing fairly, or maybe it'll miss somebody who's cheating. Having a visible authority figure, having an arbiter present is really important, right? So having an arbiter present is like when you walk into an electronics store, or a store that's selling CDs, or even supermarkets, right? You have a security guard at the front of the store, and you have to walk past that security guard before you go in. Now, that security guard is not there to catch every single person who's shoplifting, but they discovered long ago that if you have a security guard at the front door, the fact that there's a visible authority figure when people walk into the store massively reduces the amount of shoplifting. The security guard doesn't have to walk up and down every aisle and check every single person's pockets and check every single bag when people come in and out of the store. They just have to be there. And the fact that they're there, right, will be a huge deterrent, right? Think about how many security cameras are fake or are real but not switched on, right? How many times do you test a door to see if it's really locked, right? It's probably locked, it's closed, right? So just having an arbiter present makes a big difference, and having an arbiter visible, that means, communicating, talking to, having your face on Zoom, right? Being able to be available during the games, right? So can a player call the arbiter during the game? These processes, these systems help to make the arbiter the authority figure for the tournament visible, and that will make your tournament a much fairer place to play. There are even some, some ideas about, declarations. And when you get somebody to make a statement that says, I'm going to play fairly, then they're more likely to play fairly because they've made some statement. So on Tornelo, you've got a little box that pops up if the arbiters want that to be there that says, are you going to play fairly? And somebody has to click saying, yes, I'm an honest person. And just the act that they've clicked that helps add weight to the decision-making process and make it easier to play fairly and just a little bit harder to get assistance during the games. All right, the second phase is supervision. And remember, in supervision, it will be different for every event. All right, some events you're going to need a lot of supervision because it's a very high-level event. Other events you want an appropriate, maybe lower level of supervision. Okay, understand that people are building their own playing area, so you can talk to them and ask them to treat their their desk, their bedroom, their kitchen, wherever they're playing, treat it the same way that they would if they were playing in a playing hall in an over the board tournament. All right, no electronic devices. Keep things like they would in a real tournament. So obviously the first step for supervision is to use people's real names, right? To know who's playing in your tournament and for them to know that you know who they are and to trust that it is a real person. Okay, so that's the first step. Use the real names. The second step that you can follow, all right, is to have a camera. Some sort of Zoom or video conference, of any sort, Zoom, Jitsi, Google Meets, Teams, whatever it is that you happen to use, and the camera can supervise the player. All right, this is good not just for the fact that you can watch them and their behavior, but the players can see each other, and so it removes the anonymity of their opponents as well, just a little bit. Make sure that you've got good lighting, right? So you can see people's face and you can see their eye movements and you can see their body language. Some higher level tournaments will ask for a side camera or multiple cameras. So you've got a camera on their face and you've got a camera from the side, so you can see their keyboard and their mouse and their hands, or that you can see even some of their screen on the camera as well. So you can ask for different levels of supervision depending on the level of the tournament, right? If it's a club tournament, at the local level, and you're asking somebody to play, with 3 cameras in every direction and a security guard in the room, well, it's just never going to happen. So you can't put too much of a burden on the players. It's got to be appropriate for the level of tournament that you're playing, right? Most players can play under supervision of a camera and have reasonable lighting. That's not too much to ask. All right. You can record some of those sessions. If you are recording those, make sure the players know that there's recordings going on, and make sure that there's privacy procedures in place so that those recordings are deleted at an appropriate moment later on. You can ask players to share their screens. Right. Oh, so you could do microphones as well. So we've got a microphone here. So the microphone would listen to the audio in the playing area of that player. Okay. You can ask people to share their screen. So using a tool like Zoom, you can have multiple people in the tournament sharing their screen at the same time, and you can see what they're seeing on their screen. All right. And so the screen sharing will prevent the form of cheating where somebody has a chess engine, and they're switching tabs from one chess engine, from their playing platform to the chess engine, getting some help and then switching back. All right, so that will prevent that sort of cheating. Right, of course, it won't stop somebody from having a phone sitting on their desk. Right, so you can have you can have their taskbar available. You can check their programs that are running. Are they running another application in the background? Are they running some sort of bot that will watch them and watch the game and choose a move or suggest a move. All right. There are plugins now into Chrome that will run, which will not necessarily show up when you're in the software, because it's not another piece of software. It's just Google Chrome that's running the bot or the engine, and so it's not just this is not the only way to find people. So just remember all these methods of supervision. Make sure there's no other people in the room with the player. Make sure they don't have any electronic devices with them or other computers that are available in the room. All of these are options, right? Depending on the type of event that you're running. So if you were involved in the European Championships or the Olympiad, you'd be asking for all of this because it's a high-level tournament, right? And you say, well, we want to have everybody's microphone on. We want to have a professional environment. We can ask for a lot. When we're running, kids tournaments, even like a national championship for kids, we're going to ask for the option. Okay, we're not going to have all of this in place. We're going to ask for the option so that if we identify players who need some greater assistance, then we'll ask them to turn on their screen share and their camera. But we won't have screen share and camera on for everybody all the time, right? Because it's too much of a burden for the players for the level of event that they're playing in. The community trusts one another enough that they don't have to go through all of the hassle of all of this supervision. And remember, the purpose of all this supervision isn't to catch anybody, right? We're not trying to catch someone who's cheating. What you're trying to do is build evidence that you can support the players who are playing well, right? So at the end of the tournament, if somebody's played 300 or 400 points above their rating, right? Some players complain and have a go, oh, that's not possible, they must have cheated. That you as the arbiter can reprimand the person who's complaining, because you can say, well, hang on a second, that's not very good sportsmanship to immediately accuse somebody of cheating when they've played well in the tournament. We have these supervision processes in place. We know, because we've supervised, that they are playing fairly, right? And so this is what we're trying to do. You don't have all of these things in place to try and catch somebody, because you're very unlikely to catch anybody in all of the online tournaments. Very, very few. Have you seen somebody on camera with their mobile phone in their hand, or somebody in the background shouting out moves to them, and then you hear it on their microphone? Right? This is extremely rare to be able to do that. So you want to increase the supervision for the players who need it. You want to increase the supervision for the events that need it. And these are the sorts of options that you have available to you. The final step in the process is verification. We've got a fair play report on Tornelo that displays some of these statistical analyses on a round by round basis. And the purpose of that is to try to identify as we go, in real time, which players need more supervision, which players are, perhaps suspicious. All right, here we've got one person with a, way out on 24, and everybody else is on a negative score. This player might need a lot more supervision, and they might need to have a conversation with that player. For people who are cheating blatantly, it becomes obvious, and you can disqualify people early on from a tournament if you need to. But this verification process is just checking that all of the other things that you've done are working. And what you're hoping to find here is nothing, right? All right. This report should help you to say, well, I've got 100 people in my tournament. Who should I supervise more closely? Because you're never going to have enough manpower to supervise every single player in the level of detail that would actually identify and catch them if they were cheating. So you need some clues. Where do you put your time and energy? Where do you put your resources? Right? And this report, which comes out on a round by round real-time basis, will just give you some of those clues. Where should you be putting your energy? So in practice, communication is really important. You want to be communicating with your players, with the other arbiters in the tournament, with captains if you've got teams events, and use all of the tools that we have available, right? You've got Zoom, you've got Slack, you've got WhatsApp, you've got Google spreadsheets. How do you communicate with each other to help make sure that that those processes are all in place, that you've got an environment that's conducive to fair play, that makes people want to play the right way, that you're building that community of trust, that you are supervising the players, and then you can help communicate with each other as arbiters about about how to supervise one another, help supervision. We have some of these resources online, so a spreadsheet that you could use between arbiters that would help to track some of those those supervision metrics. Are people doing the right thing? Do they have their cameras switched on? So Google spreadsheets is a great way of communicating because everyone's collaborating on the same document. All right, so yeah, communication is really, really important. Make sure you've got your rules in advance. Right? These are the sorts of things that you as an arbiter or as a tournament organizer need to be doing and need to have ready in advance. So you need to make sure that the rules are clear. Right? Obviously, the rules are clear that they're not allowed to get assistance, but what's going to happen to the prizes? When are you going to make those decisions? What happens to the players' points when they get disqualified? Right? Are you returning points or just marking them as 0? Do the opponents get extra points? How's that going to affect the tiebreak situation? All of those sorts of things. So write your regulations, think about it all well in advance. Okay, who's going to be making those decisions? Is it a panel of people or is it a single person? Right. So those rules should be very, very clear and communicated well in advance. All right. Having those conversations with players will also help them to play more fairly because you've talked about it and you've done some education along the way. Be impartial, be independent. Obviously, that's the role of an arbiter. Be transparent and accessible because that will help to build trust in the community when you're transparent about what the process is and the steps that you're taking and that how you're making your decisions. And make sure that the decision that you make is made in a timely manner. Right? Waiting a week or 2 weeks to make a decision is often too long, and it's better to make a decision. You're not going to collect any new information 2 weeks after the event. So what are you waiting for? You'll get some information, some evidence, and you'll have to make a decision based on that evidence. Right? The evidence, you have to weigh that up and make that decision. It is definitely a difficult part of the challenge, and we would normally be suggesting that you're looking for different types of evidence that all points in the same direction, that there's a consistent story that the evidence is showing that that on balance of probabilities, or beyond reasonable doubt, or somewhere in between, what level of satisfaction do you want? And in sport, and what we would recommend is that you are aiming for what we call comfortable satisfaction. You want to get to a point where you are comfortably satisfied that the person has cheated in their tournament, and the evidence points to that comfortable satisfaction. And you can think of it like if balance of probabilities was 51%, if it was 51% likely, you could disqualify them. And then beyond reasonable doubt, if it's a murder trial, has to be 100%, then we're sitting somewhere in the middle at kind of 75%, and that you are definitely more than just balance of probabilities. Like, yep, they probably cheated. It's got to be, yes, we're comfortably satisfied that they had assistance in their games. And the only way you can reach that comfortable satisfaction, I think, is if you've got multiple forms of evidence that are all pointing in the same direction, or if one form of evidence is incredibly overwhelming. If you see on the camera through the supervision, oh yeah, they had their phone right in their hand, at the same time as they've just beaten somebody 1,000 points higher rated than them, right? That's kind of, can become obvious. So the types of evidence that you can collect are statistical evidence, that's from the numbers, that's your fair play reports. You can get platform evidence. Sometimes the platform could give you feedback about the players. You can have that physical evidence which is, you've watched them on a camera, you've seen some behavioural, behavioural evidence that maybe leads you to think that there's something not quite right, and you can get an expert to analyse the games themselves and get an opinion from the experts. All right, so those are I guess different forms of evidence. You can have an opinion from an expert, but just be careful with that, because two different experts might have two different opinions, and that is just an opinion. It's not really the same the same weight as other evidence might be. So look at these four things, and if you've got kind of multiple multiple signals that are all pointing in the same direction, then that might lead you to a situation where you are comfortably satisfied that there was some cheating going on, and you can then start to make your decisions based on that. Tornelo is here to help you run better chess tournaments. That's what Tornelo does. We help to run better chess tournaments. It's a free platform. Everybody can use Tornelo. Clubs, federations, tournament organizers, coaches, whoever wants. We have a lot of resources on our website, tornelo.com, and there's a start here page which has user manuals, it has guides, it has templates, it has rules and regulations for fair play. If you don't want to write your own, you can take ours and use those as a starting point. Right? Whatever we can do to help you to run better chess tournaments, that's what we're working towards. So thank you very much for joining in today. We appreciate you being here. We look forward to seeing you in the next seminar that we're running.